Let's be honest, have you ever fought with an API that just made no sense? One that was confusing, brittle, or just plain infuriating? Yeah, you are definitely not alone. So today, we're going to see how to turn that frustration into function. We're diving deep into the core ideas from the book Crafting Great APIs with Domain-Driven Design to figure out how we can build APIs that developers actually, truly love to use.
Okay, so before we get to the solutions, let's start with a little group therapy. We have all been there, right? Trying to integrate with an API that feels like it was designed to make our lives miserable. The book has this brilliant hall of shame for these common anti-patterns. So let's take a quick and maybe painful tour.
First up, the classic. The API that's basically just a thin layer over a database. You know the one. It exposes internal table structures, column names, the whole shebang, directly to the outside world. And the problem? It is incredibly brittle. I mean, any tiny change to the database, like renaming a single column, could break every single application that depends on it. Ouch.
Next, we've got the API that's built purely for the convenience of the person who made it, not the person who has to use it. This kind of API perfectly mirrors the backend's internal logic, but it completely ignores how a front-end developer or an external partner would actually need to consume that data. It's a textbook case of building from the inside out, without a single glance from the outside in. Oh, and this one's my personal favorite, the World Domination API. This is the absolute monster that tries to do everything for everyone. You see these endpoints that are a mile long, trying to pull customers and their accounts and their transactions and the weather on the day of the transaction, all in one terrifying call. It's just impossible to maintain, impossible to understand, and a total nightmare to evolve. And that leads us right to this one, the API designed in total isolation. This is what happens when architects draw up a plan without ever talking to the business experts who get the domain or the developers who actually have to, build and use the thing. It might look absolutely perfect on a whiteboard, but it just completely falls apart in the real world. And finally, maybe the most frustrating of them all, the API with zero documentation. Or even worse, documentation that just flat out lies to you. You're left just guessing what the endpoints do, what the parameters mean, and why on earth it keeps throwing a 500 error. It turns what should be an engineering task into a bad detective novel. Okay, so we've seen the gallery of horrors. It's pretty easy to point out what's wrong, right? But the real question, the one we're here to answer, is how do we get it right? How do we go from these painful experiences to building APIs that are elegant, functional, and maybe even beautiful? Well, the answer isn't some single silver bullet. It's really a mix of a powerful mindset shift and a super practical toolkit. It's all about starting to treat your API not as some technical afterthought, but as a first-class product. So let's explore some of the most critical tools we have for this transformation. One of the most crucial technical things you have to get right is planning for the future. Your API isn't going to be static. It's going to evolve, it's going to change. And if we don't manage that evolution really carefully, we risk breaking everything for everyone who depends on us. This is where mastering versioning becomes absolutely non-negotiable. At the very heart of versioning is this one big idea, the breaking change. This is any little modification, like removing a field, changing a data type, renaming an endpoint, that will cause an existing client application to just fail. The main goal of any good versioning strategy is to avoid these, or at least to manage them very, very intentionally. And to build that kind of resilience, we need to think about compatibility in two flavors. Now, backward compatibility is what we usually focus on. We add new stuff to our API, and the old clients don't break. Simple enough. But forward compatibility is just as critical. It means a client can get a message from a newer version of the API and not crash. Maybe it just ignores the new fields it doesn't understand. You really need both for a truly robust system. But look, great APIs are not just about technical details like versioning. They're born from a better process. To avoid that ivory power or the back-end first API, you have to fundamentally change how you design. You have to get people in a room together. And this image right here shows a brilliant, structured way to do just that. This is the synergistic blueprint. And just look at who's involved at each stage. You've got business experts, architects, developers, security folks, UX experts. It's a literal roadmap for collaboration, taking you from high-level business ideas all the way down to the nitty-gritty API definitions. This process makes sure the API actually serves the business and is practical to build. So what about that world domination API we talked about earlier? How do you tame that beast? Well, the solution lies in domain-driven design, or DDD. The core idea is to break your massive, complicated business domain into smaller, more manageable pieces. We call these bounded contexts. Each context has a crystal clear purpose and its own language. So instead of one giant API, you design smaller, focused APIs for each context. And that's how you get clarity and sanity. All right, so we've looked at the problems and the tools to fix them. But what's the end goal here? What does a great, or as the authors put it, a beautiful API actually look like? What is the real payoff for all this hard work? Well, a beautiful API is designed before a single line of code is written. That's the API first approach. It's built on those well-defined bounded contexts we just talked about. It uses a clear, shared language that both the business and tech people actually understand. And, crucially, it has excellent documentation with real-world examples and a sandbox environment so developers can play with it easily. But above all else, it's treated like a valuable product, not just some technical side project. You know, if you take away only one single thing from all of this, let it be this. The technology is only part of the puzzle. The biggest improvements you'll ever make will come from changing the process, from getting the right people in the room to design a solution together. And that really leaves us with one final challenging question to ask ourselves about our own work. Is the API you're building just a technical endpoint, a URL that spits out some JSON, or is it a product? Because a product has users, it has good documentation, it has a support plan and a roadmap for the future. It's designed with real care to solve a real problem. Shifting your mindset from endpoint to product, that is the first and most important step to crafting a truly great API.